Good evening, everyone. I am Rona Riodika, ND Class of 2001 and co-chair of NDNY's Intercultural Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight for the second event of our Beyond the Comfort Zone series. This series of events provides a platform for diverse voices from the Notre Dame community to engage in open, honest, and yes, comfortable, but meaningful and constructive dialogue. Let's learn from one another as we share our similarities, understand our differences, push our boundaries, challenge ourselves, and above all, agree to uphold a common respect for one another. Thank you to our club leaders, Marco and Rachel, for supporting this initiative and for their vision and drive for prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially at a time like this. I'm glad to see that other alumni clubs have also taken the bold step to do the same. We are currently living in what I call the perfect storm as we face an unprecedented global health pandemic and overwhelming social and economic uncertainty. And at the eye of the storm is systemic racism and its disparate impact on marginalized populations and communities of color. At last Thursday's panel on donors answering the call to anti-racism, we listened to members of our very own Notre Dame community share their personal experiences and speak their own truth about their encounters with racism and efforts towards racial equity at Notre Dame. While Our Lady's University is indeed a special place for many of us, and we often proudly claim it as the best university in the world, we need to also realize that not every student has shared the same sentiment about our alma mater. And that means that we, as one Notre Dame community, have a lot of work to do. And it's okay to say that we're not there yet, but it is not okay to just stay where we are. Tonight's panel will focus on Notre Dame Reimagined. So as we listen to our all-star panelists, I encourage everyone to imagine for a minute that We Are ND stands for We Are Not Done. And by we, I mean all of us, not just our students and alumni of color. There's a lot of work to do and we're just getting started. So let's ask ourselves, how can we apply our Catholic social teaching to promote racial equity and answer Our Lady's call to be a powerful force for good? And how can we be a true game changer and be the change that we seek? We want to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share your response to this question through the link below on your screen. And with that thought, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Juliette LaChapelle. Juliette is a 1987 graduate of PLS, the Program of Liberal Studies. After Notre Dame, she spent a volunteer year with the Holy Cross Associate Program before heading off to Harvard Law School. She describes her career as one long adventure, having worked as a trial attorney in New York, a federal prosecutor in Texas, and now as a mediator and a very vocal mom in Colorado. Juliette moderated our first panel last week and did an excellent job. So please, Juliette, take it away.
Thank you, Rona. Thank you for that introduction. And yes, we indeed have a lot of work to do. From talking to the panelists this past week and the week before, we all know this to be true. I also want to thank the entire New York team. You guys just continue to wow me with how quickly you're able to get things done. We finished that panel last week and boom, this one was already in place. And you were sending me text messages and emails. So thank you. And thank you to the panelists who have been so generous with their time this past week, sharing your experiences with me. It's definitely been very powerful for me and very informative. I have been asked to give out the ground rules as I did last week, and they're very simple. It's the Courageous Conversations Protocol, and basically 4 rules, and it applies to everybody who's listening. Number 1 is to stay engaged. Number 2 is to experience discomfort, to actually let yourself experience discomfort, whether that be with terminology, with the emotions that are being expressed, or with proposed plans or things that you think should be proposed but haven't been. Third is to truly listen to each participant and to accept that they are speaking their own truth. and to listen without judgment. And finally, to expect and accept non-closure, that you will need to continue having these conversations if you really intend to be a part of the anti-racism efforts. So with that, does anybody on the panel have anything they'd like to add in terms of ground rules? All right, I don't see anybody. So let's meet our panelists. Avis, could we start with you? I think you're on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion. Thank you for being here, for making time. I'm Avis Boyd. I am class of '82. I am the managing director currently for the Alumni Association's Diversity Council. This is the second year of a 2-year term for me. I've been on council what will now be for 5 years, having served as the West Region Director from 2016 to 2019. I have a bachelor's degree in biology out of Notre Dame, met my husband at Notre Dame as class of '81, and have 2 daughters who graduated class of '03 and class of '06. So we like to say we are ND.
Love it. Love it. Angel?
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. My name is Angel Henderson. I recently graduated in May, class of 2020, with a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and International Economics Arabic. I'm one of the 4 co-authors of the Young Black Alumni Petition and Call to Action. And right now I am headed off to Columbia Law School for my Juris Doctor.
Awesome, thank you. Dalen?
What's up, everybody? I'm also a class of 2020. I'm senior defensive end captain for the Notre Dame football team. So like I said, I graduated 2020, and I'm excited to be here, excited to express my experiences with you guys, and hopefully make Notre Dame the best version of itself. So we are indeed. Go Irish.
Thank you, Dalen. Dalen was also a very powerful speaker at the rally for the Black Lives Matter movement rally on Juneteenth. So just that background. All right, and Kevin?
Everyone, I'm Kevin Barry, Senior Director of Notre Dame Learning, which is a new unit on campus that is collaborating with faculty to help design and deliver the best possible learning experiences to Notre Dame students, regardless of modality. So it combined the Office of Digital Learning that was doing online courses with the Canop Center for Teaching Excellence, which is the unit that supports instructors for more on-campus courses. And we've been trying to chip away at issues of diversity and inclusion for a long time. So I was really pleased and honored to be asked to be part of this panel, and want to echo Juliet's praise of the New York team that has just been amazing in bringing everyone in for this, and to Juliet herself for all the time and effort she's put in to have these conversations, which for me was a wonderful opportunity to talk about and think about some things. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And Pamela?
Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela Nolan Young. I'm class of 1987 at Notre Dame Law School, and I'm currently the Director of Academic Diversity and Inclusion at the university. I work in the Provost's office, so work primarily with our faculty, graduate students, and postdocs, and I'm glad to be here.
All right, thank you all for being here. So let's move on to substance. And I want to root us in the moment. So today, Congressman John Lewis was laid to rest after a week of powerful memorials. President George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Presidents George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama were there to pay their respects and celebrate his life, along with what seemed like half of Congress. Many people spoke, including his friend, Reverend James Lawson, whose words sounded more like poetry than a eulogy. But the most powerful words for me were those of Congressman Lewis himself. He had left a letter to be published on the day of his burial for all of us to read. And as planned, it appeared this morning in the New York Times. At the end of it, he had this to say to all of us. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and power of everlasting love be your guide. And with that in mind, I'd like to put my first question to the entire panel and just let you take it one by one, and then we'll kind of segment off and get into more deep discussion. This first question is, in this moment, with the history of all that has happened in the United States in the last 6 months, if you had to recreate Notre Dame to meet this moment, what would you include in your mission statement? And as you recruit all the necessary players like faculty and staff and admin, how would you pitch Notre Dame to them? Avis, I can see you want to start.
Thank you so much for that vision you have. Okay, how I would pitch Notre Dame. I would start by pitching Notre Dame as being a reflection of the light of Christ. When I looked at our website today, just to kind of see what's front and center for the university, throughout the entire site were references to our Catholic character, to our social justice desires, to the good works that people are doing, whether it's academically, through research, through community involvement. And all of that is based on a standard, and that standard is Christ. So I would pitch us first as an institution that has the goal of reflecting the light of Christ. I would also want to pitch us as a place of authenticity. And this is part of reimagining, not just as it is right now, but a place of authenticity, where what we stand for is how we live. And a place where all people, irrespective of their race, ethnicity, social class, sexual preference, as human beings that walk the earth, can come to gain knowledge and to learn how to build relationships and work better with people who are different than ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Angel, what about you from the student perspective? How would you pitch Notre Dame to a prospective student in a reimagined sense?
In a reimagined sense, I'd pitch Notre Dame as a place where they can feel comfortable and really find a family. That's how Notre Dame was pitched to me when I was a prospective student. And I don't think that Notre Dame met that mark. Feeling comfortable in all senses of the word, in every classroom, in every environment, not just environments that we had to seek for years and months for some of us to find on our own. A climate that is anti-racist, which I think all of us are really pushing towards finding, that doesn't tolerate racism or discrimination in any sense, where the LGBTQ community is uplifted and supported, where the Black community is uplifted and supported, a university that doesn't have racist and racially insensitive murals in the main building. That's just...
We're going to get to that. We're going to get into that. Absolutely.
That's the start. So
that's a good start. How about you, Dalen? How would you pitch? And in your case, you could pitch to maybe a football recruit. How would you pitch Notre Dame in terms of what you would like it to be?
Right. I think that what's important is that Notre Dame remains critical of itself, like in upholding the standards and values that they portray themselves to uphold. As a recruit and as a student, like Angel said, these were the things that were presented to me. But I would like these things to be like critically examined in a day in, day out basis, where we're constantly reevaluating if we're upholding to that standard. So, just like I said in my speech, like that accountability to one another, that doesn't happen in one conversation and one panel. That's a constant reevaluation and a constant tweaking and a constant growing and evolving Notre Dame. So one that is not afraid of change, that doesn't cling to tradition as a crutch to not take steps forward as a university and as a community. So just continuing to take those steps forward, remaining critical of ourselves, and make sure that we're upholding the standard with one another.
Yes, accountability. Love that word. And Kevin, what about you?
Yeah, I think if the thing that I was thinking of, and I think it connects some to what Avis said and actually to what Dylan and Angel were saying, is that the central theme of the mission would be justice. And that justice has to be something that's looked for internally. I think we seem to do a lot better job about trying to do social justice work where we're looking at other places that need to be more socially just. But we need to think about justice on our own campus. And for me, the term justice connects to anti-racism because justice allows us to compensate for the oppression and the ways that we've treated people in the past that have not allowed them to have the same opportunities, and to make up for that, as opposed to, sometimes I'm challenged by the idea of equity because I think equity is not enough in a lot of cases. So for me, I think that would be in the reimagined sense, we would be in pursuit of justice where we're trying to make up for the past. And, even there are some interesting things happening on campus. Some talking about reparations. What do we owe to the Pokagon band of the Potawatomi? So there's a lot of history that has to be dealt with. And I think justice is the broad term that for me can sort of serve as an umbrella to pursue a lot of that. And
to me, when I hear justice today, I hear that term as anti-racism, as the dismantling of these structures and these systems that have been in place to oppress others, anybody who's considered other. And Pamela, what about you? How would you answer this question?
So I could simply say ditto to the remarks that all of the other panelists have made. I certainly agree with them. When I heard the question, my first thought was, I actually don't need to reimagine Notre Dame. What I would like is to have Notre Dame live up to the vision that's stated. So we call ourselves a preeminent Catholic institution, and we use Catholic with both a small c and a big C. And I think that's really what we're called to do, to live into the mission that we have stated.
All right. Let's go first and talk a little bit about where we are, because we're saying we need to do the work. We're not done yet. Let's talk about where we are at this moment. And Pamela, if I could keep you on for a moment to tell us a little bit about diversity at Notre Dame. Where do we stand? What are the numbers for faculty and students currently at Notre Dame?
So if you take a look at the university's website, it reports that 29% of our student population are domestic students of color. And so that would include all of the groups that are normally identified on the US Census, which would be African American, Asian American, Latinx, Native American, and Pacific Islanders. So those numbers are sort of put us in the mid-range with other institutions. By comparison, Dartmouth College, which was my undergraduate alma mater, has about 10% more than our university. So we're not doing poorly, but certainly the calls have been that the numbers be more reflective of the US population. So among those 29%, there's probably only about 4% who are African American, but our African American population in the country, of course, is much higher than that.
Yes. And
on the faculty,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, on the faculty side, we're not doing as well as we are on the students. So about 11% of our tenure track faculty are Asian American. African American or Black faculty generally is between 2 to 3%. The Latinx faculty is 6%. And our Native American faculty is 0.01. So very, very small amount. And again, we're probably doing not as well as some of our peers, but certainly better than some other institutions.
So I just went to have a look and compare Notre Dame to other schools, and I found a site called stacker.com. Have you ever heard of that site?
I'm not familiar with that one. The one site that I am familiar with is College Factol, which is a matching site that ranks institutions on a number of different factors, including diversity.
Okay, and where does Notre Dame stand on that site in terms of diversity?
So on that site, Notre Dame is sort of mid-range. So there are a number of institutions that rank much higher, but that site, I should add, doesn't look only at racial or ethnic diversity. They use the term diversity to include gender, geographic location, and age. So when you think about the total student composition of Notre Dame, those other factors, gender and especially geographic location, would probably bump us up more than we might be if we only looked at racial or ethnic diversity.
All right. So Avis, I'd like to talk with you about how we address recruitment issues with students through the Alumni Association. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Currently, the structure is that through our diversity boards, being the Black Alumni Board, the Asian Pacific Alumni Board, Hispanic Alumni Board, and the Native American Alumni Board, they each have volunteer leaders that are in a position to address student recruitment. So when they are brought back on campus, typically twice a year by the Alumni Association, they will physically meet with the enrollment office for admissions to address the strategy for the coming year and or the outcome of numbers and yield for that particular year. It is within their ranks for their particular constituents that they focus on outreach to alumni in various areas to support the recruitment efforts of the enrollment office. And that varies by region, by location, dependent upon where the university is trying to gain a stronger yield. And the outreach kind of goes from there. For diverse alumni, I will say that our experience and connection to the university is primarily, first and foremost, through the experience of the students who are currently there. Okay. So if the pulse of the students who are currently there is not at a position of health, then that can severely impact and does impact not only your yield opportunities, but your participation on the part of alumni to support those recruiting efforts. And as a result of the negative feedback that people can receive when they come back to campus for games or any other programmatics, that's where we go to get our information, basically. It doesn't typically come from whatever is being put out by the mail, by email or social media, et cetera. You've got your
finger on the pulse.
Yes.
So what is the pulse? What is the pulse like at the moment or during this last year? How are students doing at Notre Dame? Diverse students doing at Notre Dame?
I cannot specifically tell you anything more than what you have seen reflected in Angel's efforts to unite several other recent alums and their messaging with regard to the environment when they were students. And it is not a good pulse in some regards. It's not saying that everyone has a negative experience, but when you have feedback that we receive as alumni that is repeated, then that is cause for alarm. And in those areas that I think we're going to probably address specifically, There are a couple of areas, one being the Moreau program, which is for first-year experienced students to do, for all students, to do more of a cultural competency insight gain. And based on the way in which that is being handled by various staff or faculty who are teaching those programs, which, by the way, is on a volunteer basis. It's kind of an adjunct responsibility that they voluntarily take on.
Yes, I
that
think
you have
Kevin
different
talked a
experiences.
little bit about that.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I would say that also always having to feel like you're representing your entire race when you speak is not okay. It's not okay to be put in that position. We've had students after the election that were critically challenged based on either DACA status or immigration status or inappropriate comments being made with regard to borders, cages, things along those lines. So when you see these activities and hear about these things happening, our first response is, what's the accountability factor? And that's an area of policy that we hope can be influenced by some of the recommendations we're making to have an Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion included at the university.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to the source in terms of the pulse. Angel, you just graduated this past year, correct? Tell us a little bit about your experience. I'd like you to start with how you first arrived at Notre Dame and what your experience was during that recruitment time.
Yes, so one of my good friends from high school actually received the Posse Scholarship to Notre Dame, and she convinced me to apply so she wouldn't be there by herself. So I applied. I was scheduled for the same spring visit trip with her. Upon arrival to the university, I was dead set on not going. It was very gloomy. It was snowing in April. And as a New Orleanian, this was something I was not interested in spending 4 years doing. So however, I went to a mass with Father Joe Kapura in Dillon Hall, and he said something that really spoke to me at the time, admitting that he was a sinner and every day he tries again. And with what I was going through currently within my own church and within my own family, I felt that Notre Dame had the spirit of Christ. And that was what I was interested in partaking in a campus that had the same values as me, that had the same morals, the same ideals for this country as I did. However, I quickly learned that that was not the case throughout my first few months at Notre Dame, through a variety of experiences in my dorm hall, in my classrooms. I'm not sure if you want me to elaborate on any of
Yes, please, please.
Oh, yikes. So on my first day at Notre Dame, when I was moving in, my father, I have a single father. So my father and my uncles were helping me move in. They went to park the car, and I was by myself trying to move large pieces of furniture and boxes into my room. A young lady, a white girl and her family, her mother and father came up to me and asked me if I needed assistance. I told them no, that my father and my uncles would be up to help me move those in a second. They're just parking the car. And her face, she was extremely shocked. Her jaw dropped, and I was really confused as to why she was like extremely, I don't know, just shocked at me saying that my father, yeah. And so I heard her whisper to her mom and her dad, she has a father, like her father's here. And I was baffled completely. So I went into my room and I sat there waiting for my dad to come up, trying to figure out why she would think that my father would not be there when hers was there. And as I went through the list in my mind of all of the reasons, the only thing I could arrive at was the stereotype of a young African-American not having a father in their life. So that was my first instance of racism, my second in my entire life, if I can recall.
And that was on the day that you arrived at Notre Dame.
Yes. And so I continued on. I had a great roommate experience. I pushed that to the back of my head. I went to classes, and I had a horrible instance in a classroom where I corrected a student after being told to by the TA as to why I didn't agree with his statement. And he asked me who I thought I was. And once again, I was shocked. And that moment ultimately set the trajectory for the next year and a half that I had at Notre Dame, because of that fear of being berated in class with a young man asking me who I thought I was for correcting him. I didn't want to experience that again, so I didn't really speak in many of my classes.
You were basically silenced at that point.
Yes, I was.
By the experience with that one student.
Yes.
Did the professor, did the instructor step in that moment?
Yes, the TA did step in. He told the young man that I was actually correct, and that if he had done the reading, he would have known not to give the incorrect answer that he did. It was about Soviet Russia. It was one very interesting class, but and there were other experiences like that in my Moreau classes specifically, where I was silenced and made to be very uncomfortable by the professor and also the students in the classroom. And that has continued throughout my 4 years at Notre Dame. I've become a little more emboldened and courageous. So I speak up and have spoken up in most of my classes thus far. However, it's still that same feeling, that same heart dropping feeling where I'm preparing for the backlash of me having the audacity to speak up for whether it be my people or my beliefs. So yeah, and I think that's what the majority of African-American students and ultimately students of color I know on campus have experienced. Yeah.
So, and many of those experiences were put into the change.org petition that was addressed to leadership. Yes. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with it. Choma Amuzi was on our last panel. She told us that you and 3 other friends essentially were part of a larger group. Yes. And back and forth with BA of Notre Dame, you came up with these talking points. One of the primary talking points is about the creation of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Mm-hmm. What was, did that all come from you all, or was that something that was coming, suggested to you? Is it something that you could see, like there's a problem here at Notre Dame and it needs an umbrella organization?
Yeah, so we had a larger discussion with about 158 people in a larger group chat. Mostly current students and alumni, some from 2014, some from further on, where we talked about possible solutions to the experiences that we had and what could have prevented those experiences. And one of the ideas was the creation of this office as well as an accountability board, because even in us reporting these instances of racism or racial insensitivity, discrimination, what have you, we rarely saw accountability. We rarely saw repercussions, whether it be for faculty, staff, or the students in our classrooms. So it was a long time coming to get to that point of, for one, writing the petition, but also creating this entire group chat and getting on Zoom calls and attempting to really get to the nitty-gritty of what we saw and thought were tangible things that the university could do moving forward.
And it's very, very detailed. And I checked this morning, it has over 11,400 signatures as of this morning. So an additional 400 from last week, and it just keeps moving. So Pamela, how do we move the needle on some of these issues in terms of our numbers, in terms of coordinating the effort of anti-racism at Notre Dame? Could you start by talking a little bit about what I think is a somewhat complex system for DEI matters at Notre Dame? Could you describe it for us first?
Sure. Let me begin by, of course, describing the structure. So many colleges and universities have a chief diversity officer, which is a cabinet level position, meaning that the person would report directly to the president and be among senior leadership. We do not have that position at Notre Dame. Instead, we have 3 director level positions. So I'm the Director of Academic Diversity and Inclusion, working primarily with faculty, graduate students, and postdoc. We have a Director of Staff Diversity and Inclusion, Eric Love, and Arnel Bolero, who is the director of multicultural students programs and services. So those three.
So it's basically three different lines that are running. If we imagine Father Jenkins at the top, there are three different lines running down with people in between.
Exactly.
Faculty, staff, students.
Exactly. So
okay.
And the in-between layer is the VP. So each of the three directors report to a different vice president. So Arnel reports through a chain of command through Aaron Harding Hoffman. Eric Love reports directly to Bob McQuaid, who's a VP for Human Resources. And I report through a chain of command to the provost. So that would be the structure. And then off to the side, so not connected, is the president's Oversight Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, which includes 9 members.
And who are they?
The 9 members are Father John, Ann Firth, Maura Ryan, who's the VP for Faculty Affairs, Laura Carlson, who's the VP for the Graduate School, Hugh Page, who is vice president and over the first year experience. Let's see, Bob McQuaid, Eric Love, and myself. And let's see, am I missing someone? But I'm not sure who I'm missing.
Now, are there any alumni participants on that committee, on the Oversight Committee?
So the Oversight Committee is all internal.
Okay.
So it's all current, it's essentially faculty and staff members. So there are no students, nor are there any alumni.
Okay. And so when you are making decisions, the three of you making decisions about diversity, equity, inclusion matters, are you coordinating those efforts, or are those efforts going forward independently?
So a little bit of both. When I've been on campus since 2016, and one of the things that I wanted to do right away was to ensure that the work that Eric and I do align, because in order to move the institution together, you need to have some synergy around the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that I did was to attend one of Eric's workshops that he gives for staff, which is titled We Are All ND. It's a basic cultural competency workshop, and it's mandatory for staff. And so I borrowed some of his concepts for the workshops that I conduct or have delivered for faculty. One of the things that Eric and I did was to convene what we called a diversity and inclusion practitioners group. That group is now over 60 people, and it is a mixed group of faculty and staff. Iris Outlaw, who was on your panel last week, was a member of that group. Kevin is a member of that group. And so that allows the people who are passionate about these issues to have a space to talk about our initiatives and things that we can collaborate on and achieve together. And I think the best example of that work was last fall. We were able to have the first diversity and inclusion conference on campus that was open to faculty, staff, and students. And it included a keynote speakers by Father Joseph, as well as a keynote speech by Robin DiAngelo. And that was
who wrote White Fragility.
Right, exactly, the author of White Fragility. So that it created a space for all of the constituents on campus to be together and to talk about those efforts.
Okay.
And it came about
that happened last year. That happened last year.
That happened last fall.
So it sounds like there's, in recent history, there's been some movement, but we're not seeing the effects of it yet. Is that fair to say?
So I think that's fair to say. And I think the most critical piece is that achievement really relied on the collaborative spirit of all of the various partners on campus. So rather than having a chief diversity officer who would be setting the agenda and corralling people towards a single goal, we're relying on individual partners on campus to sort of make those critical decisions to lead the institution. And I'm lucky to have Kevin and Eric and Arnell as partners in the work. So, but you could have individuals who would be more interested in doing their own thing as opposed to working collaboratively.
And talk to us a little bit about the other colleges. Are they part of this, what you're describing, the structure that you're describing?
So the colleges are not directly part of that structure. In 2015, our prior provost, Dr. Burrish, required all of the schools and colleges on campus to create a diversity and equity inclusion plan. Following that, since 2016, each college has annually reported on their particular initiatives. And those reports include both faculty recruitment and retention, as well as efforts around undergraduates and graduate students. Of course, they vary a little bit by discipline, but they essentially, each college is submitting their plan. Following that, in 2018, Dr. Burrish required all of the colleges to write a recruitment or hiring guide aimed at looking at diversifying the faculty by gender and also by race and ethnicity. And then last year in 2019, we began a process of analyzing the tenure and tenure track applicant pools for our faculty positions. So there have been some steps made, yes.
But they're disparate, they're siloed.
Yeah, well, the initiatives that Dr. Burrish required are required of all of the different colleges.
Is there a strategic plan for the university in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
There's not a separate strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Included in the university's current strategic plan, when I applied for my job, I reviewed it, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, there may be 2 or 3 instances where diversity is mentioned in the overall strategic plan. There's not a separate plan for these initiatives.
And it sounds like we need one. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk with Dalen. Dalen, you were part of a rally on June 19th, with the entire football team. Describe for us how that got going. How did it start?
Yeah, so it started, first of all, with our defensive coordinator and defensive line coach. They all reached out to us about, I think, 2 days after the George Floyd killing. And we basically said, like, we have a meeting about our installs, about plays, all sorts of stuff. But, I feel like this is something that requires, a meeting within our defensive unit. So we met up, we had a mandatory Zoom meeting, and everybody just kind of talked. It was just kind of like an open dialogue between our coaches.
This is the defensive line only.
No. This is the defense in general. So it started with coaches. It was the entire defense.
Okay.
And I just felt like a lot of guys said a lot of things that our coaches just hadn't been aware to. The fear that our mothers have for us when they send us across the country, and they're forced into a university like Notre Dame. A lot of these guys are coming from South Florida, South Memphis, Detroit, Richmond. You name it. These guys are coming from it, and that are part of communities that aren't similar to Notre Dame, and they're forced to, in a way, sink or swim. Because at the end of the day, we're forced to assimilate to white culture. It's not the other way around. And there's not really a lot of support in place, I feel like, on our team that is there to ease that adjustment. That we have class adjustments, for the rigorous academics. We have football adjustments. We have our, we have segments in practice that are built in for freshmen to get acclimatized to college football. But we have nothing in place to help adjust our players to what it is to be at Notre Dame, which is a difficult social setting to navigate as anyone, let alone an African-American male who's never been privy to such demographics. So, I felt like that was
you're coming into a campus that's 70% white, at least in terms of the student body, and even greater percentage in terms of the faculty.
Right.
So what happened during the course of that first Zoom call?
Our coaches were getting emotional. That was cool. Guys are really emotional. It was really open was a very open and candid conversation. And guys, had a lot of things that they felt needed to be addressed within our own building, before we talk about the concept of racism, Black Lives Matter, this entire mountain of a movement. We were talking about things that we could address in home that would make for better synergy within our team and our facility. So, we brought those things up. We had a conversation, and then about 2 days later, it became a team conversation where Coach Kelly and our entire offense was then involved with the Zoom meeting as well, where we addressed issues. And, like I said, I addressed that issue of not having any in our support
staff. There's like 90 people on the Zoom call?
No, probably close. So it was everyone, from our nutritionists to our trainers. So it was probably about 130, 140 people.
All right. Now go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Nah, but it's everyone who comprised of Notre Dame football. So anyone who has a hand in it, they were there. And, like I said, I addressed that we didn't have anyone in our support staff that is not a football coach, that has no direct correlation to football or academics, who was there just to support our Black athletes. We don't have a Black male mentor on our staff, and that's an issue. And then second was our lack of intentionality within serving our Black community of Notre Dame. I feel like our team a lot of times, can just become a little abstract. We do serve the community, but in my 5 years of being, going on 5 now, but in my 4 years of being at Notre Dame, we haven't done our Black community justice. And I got a little bit more involved because I got hurt and my schedule permitted for me to be more involved in the community. And I just saw like the impact that we were able to have, just myself and my fiance being involved in the community, and how the kids would be like lit up, and they just couldn't believe that we would, sacrifice our time to come and like kick it with them, like really. And, like that was just something I was like, we're really dropping the ball as an organization. As far as our intentionality, when we have time to serve within our season or off season, making sure that our faces are present just as much in the Black community as any other community that we serve when we're doing our community service. So those two issues.
You were volunteering at a school, a grade school, a middle school.
Well, yeah, that was one of the situations. Well, I mean, we had another where we went and spoke to kids at the Juvenile Detention Center. I worked with our Rosenthal Leadership Academy. We had an extension of that, and we did it at Measle Elementary, which is right down the street. It's I don't know how to describe it. I'm still trying to figure out everything.
You don't know exactly where you are. But this was you were driving this, as opposed to there being sort of community service through the school or through the football team. In other words, you'd like to see that happen.
Yeah, just providing those opportunities. I mean, just like anything, you just want to, like, our athletes have a lot that's demanded of them on a day in and day out schedule. So just providing these opportunities for the athletes to tap into, whether they want to or not. Some guys, prefer, like, I don't know, like, it's whatever your preference is. We just have these opportunities lined up for you, and you can access them at your disposal. But, I felt like we were dropping the ball on providing those opportunities and getting those out in front of our players. And I felt like that was something, like, I had to go and seek those opportunities out on my own. And it was only because I had injured my shoulder, so I had a lot more free time. So, like, guys who are in the midst of a season or in the midst of off-season training and spring ball and et cetera, like, you want to make these as easy and accessible as possible for these guys so that they can just look at it. All right, this is what I'm doing. All right, I'll be there at 6, whatever, and kind of move forward from there.
Just organize it and make it happen.
Essentially, just provide more opportunities for us to get involved.
So the rally, you spoke, there was somebody last name Siegel.
Max Siegel.
Max Siegel?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then Father Jenkins spoke, Coach Kelly spoke, and everyone very, very passionate. And clearly moved by the moment. During Coach Kelly's speech, he talked about how it was imperative that we start addressing racism issues in our culture and at Notre Dame. He said, in fact, at one point, it's easy to take down a Confederate statue. You can do that in one day. But this other work is going to require much more effort. What is happening now that you've you've gotten past this rally. Have you seen a change in the team?
Well, yeah, I think that there's just an extreme intentionality in everything that we're doing as far as that goes. Like we're developing a unity council to get guys more involved in these types of settings where, because of our schedule, we're not permitted to be a part of like BSA or Shades of Ebony or like Wabruta, like things like that on campus that are going on where like they're Black organizations where guys can get more involved. There's kind of a gap just because of our timing. There's not a lot of free time for us to get involved with those types of things or to be like more accessible with it. So we're kind of coming up with something on our own team where we can be more involved and we can have like guys on our team kind of address the issues that they see. And we kind of work in tandem with these organizations on campus. So that's been something that Coach Kelly has been very intentional about, as well as his Kelly Cares Foundation. I believe he stopped. So it was for breast cancer awareness, but now it's for like racial inequality. And something that, when Coach Kelly puts his name on a foundation and he gets his, like we have directed.
Done. Right, it's done. Okay, I got you.
Our team is going to follow. So, it's something that is very important to our team. It's something that we look forward to growing and cultivating in tandem with these other organizations on campus. And we're excited about it moving forward. But yeah, like I said, just with the overall, like with that team meeting eventually led to the rally coaches and, a lot of people behind the scenes went into making that happen. And everyone was like really open and honest, and they allowed us to really take the wheels on it and kind of gauge it and make it what we wanted it to be. And, Coach Kelly opened, I started with a more broad concept and kind of like giving people tangible opportunities to, make change. And Max really brought it down to, our Black community and tangible things that they had brought up, like the petition that was signed by so many of our Black alumni, bringing those things to the forefront and making culture of competency course is like mandated for our students moving forward. So, a lot of things, I think there's a lot of good things that are working right now. We have the people, and I'm excited to see where it goes moving forward.
Okay. Avis, if I could bring you back in to talk a little bit about, to the extent you know where it stands, the Green Book, because it sounds like what Dalen is raising is something that maybe the Black alumni can help with in terms of, counseling some of the students on campus within the football team or wherever they are on the campus. If you could talk a little bit about the Green Book.
A little bit.
Yes.
It's a recent, very, very recent initiative on the part of the Black Alumni Board, utilizing the passion, heart, and skill of a former assistant to the president, which was Monk Malloy at the time. And the individual is a lady by the name of Miss Shonda Johnson. And I will say that through the years, there have been surrogates that have functioned in a role that helps to coalesce students of color with more definitive support. She was one of those individuals for a number of years to support our students of color, and especially our African-American students. And so she has become engaged to generate a resource that is a compilation of Black alums that are interested in providing more unique cultural needs support for our on-campus students. And there are various categories that people have expertise in that would serve us. There's a component that deals with spirituality. There's a component that deals with leading while Black. There's a component that deals with emotional support. So there are some things that are unique to our journey as Black students on campus, which Angel and Dalen have been kind of referring to. And so for that reason, they did outreach to engage our alumni. And the interesting thing is that the boards, not just the Black Alumni Board, but the other alumni boards, diversity boards, have reached out to their alums to provide mentoring support for students and to register through Irish Compass, which is intentionally in place to provide more of a network of support for students as well as alumni. But this particular initiative has really resonated more
Yeah.
with our alumni because of how targeted it is and because it addresses, once again, their need and their experiences while on campus so that they can thrive and flourish and go on from there and not have a place that they can go or a person that they can contact, like Angel said, when she had her negative experiences, being able to reach out to somebody that you have directly available to you to kind of talk you through or walk you through certain scenarios and how to deal with them.
And as I recall, there's also a section where you sign up where you specifically can help first year students. So if you were
Yes.
a counselor at Notre Dame or an RA or in pastoral ministry, there's that category. And there's also an LGBTQ category as well. So it's meant to be comprehensive for the many different issues that are arising for the Black community at Notre Dame.
It is.
So Kevin, we want to talk a little bit about training for faculty and the extent that you can address it for students. Tell us what is currently on offer at Notre Dame from the time you arrive and then on an ongoing basis in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Sure. So this is where I will confess, I came to Notre Dame in 1994 for 2 years, 3 at the longest. I thought I would be in South Bend, Indiana. I was immediately welcomed into the community at Notre Dame. I was talking to Juliet and said, I met someone about a week and a half after I started, and she said to me, Maya, you've been here for a long time, right? And I said, no, I just got here last week. And she goes, oh, well, you just look like you belong here. And you see what I look like, right? So
yes.
I think that was meaningful. That didn't really strike me at that moment, but a few years later was one of the multiple times on campus since I've been here where Black students were questioned for sitting together when they had some free time to have a meal. And also there was a Black football player who talked at that time about how when cars were riding near him, he could hear the locks click when they would push the button to lock their car because they would see him. And so at that time we started with the group I was in, I was actually collaborating with the Canub Center at the time, doing some stuff on thinking about diverse ways of knowing and learning as our first things that we did with diversity back in the late 90s out of the Canub Center. The Canub Center only started in 96, so it was pretty soon after it started. I was looking after our conversation. I thought, well, Juliet's going to ask me what we've been doing, so now I better go look and see what we've been doing. So over the last 5 years, we've had 28 different workshops that I would consider connected to diversity and inclusion. Pamela has been a facilitator or co-facilitator of 5 of those different workshops. So we started collaborating right after she got here. One of the things that we found as I was looking through the titles is some of those workshops aren't real obviously about diversity and inclusion. So we started off with a workshop on gender in the classroom and mostly women showed up to it. But when we changed it to power dynamics in the classroom, then we got a much broader audience that would come to that. So some of our workshops are intentionally termed about the issue without naming the identity that is often associated with that issue. So at Notre Dame, I think there are, and I guess not just at Notre Dame and the country and the world, there are issues of power and women and where they're placed with power. So that was some other things that we started to do. So in the last 5 years, we've had 28 different workshops. Many of those have been offered multiple times. But unlike Pamela's mentioned that for newly hired staff, there are some required things that are done. For faculty, everything is based on their desire to participate. So there's not a requirement that they participate in those things. The other thing, last week, Maria McKenna mentioned the Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity Seminars, the SEED program. That is a much more intense program that the participants in that spend 7 to 8 3-hour meetings together with homework between each meeting where they learn about their own, they reflect and learn about their own positions and try to progress. And they also reflect on both things at Notre Dame and in the world in the context of that. And so that program's now in its the eighth cohort of seed seminar participants of years. I think there's now the actual 10th or 11th actual cohort, because a couple of independent ones happened. And that means that there's been a couple hundred, about 220 people that have participated in that. About 190 of them are still on campus. And one of the thoughts, so this is where I want to say also that for me, as I mentioned, Avis talked about taking the cue from the students. And so when I've heard things from students that turned my stomach or made me think, this place is not the place it should be, and that I'm in a position where I can maybe try to help move it a little bit, then I've tried to respond to that. So the SEED program arose after there was, in fall of 2011, or maybe it was early in January of 2012, someone thought it would be a good joke to put fried chicken in the mailboxes of the Black Student Association and the African Student Association. And the same month, a comic in the Observer, a very homophobic comic, was in the Observer. The students organized a town hall meeting after that, and I heard some of the stories like what Angel told today. Very similar stories back then, and I'm sure they go back way further than that, but I heard them in a way that I had not heard them before. And then soon after that, ran into a colleague, and I explained that I wanted to do something and was looking for a program. And she had met recently with the founder of the SEED program, and said, well, they're trying to get more universities involved. So that's how that one happened. It was really because of the students speaking up that I was able to learn about those things and move forward. And I think
what is the SEED program? What's involved in it? Like, is it, is there an intense time requirement? What's involved?
Yeah, so the SEED facilitators go to leaders training. It's a week-long retreat-like experience where you're spending 12 to 14 hours a day preparing to be a facilitator for the SEED seminars. And then the participants commit to somewhere between 20 and 30 hours of meeting time between the 3-hour meetings and the meals, along with homework that extends over an entire academic year. So that program, although it has not, I think if you looked at, professional faculty and staff who are the ones who tend to participate on campus, there's probably, 3,000 of those on campus, and we've had maybe 220 people participate. So
220 of 3,000 staff, or staff
of what I would call the exempt staff and the faculty. So that's that professional level. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people in hourly positions would not be authorized to participate.
Okay. Avis, yes.
I was just in listening to Kevin and having listened to Pamela as well, and some of the dialogue, and reflecting on some of the things I've heard Father Jenkins say as well. If you look online, if you read the literature, all the brand marketing, if you listen to the different programmatics that are in place, you would say, it sounds like the university is doing all the things they need to do. And yet we are here today. And I just like to acknowledge that I believe we can programmatically work everything out. But if it doesn't change a person's heart to change their behavior, then those are hours that probably need to be better directed in some way to yield a different outcome. Because what Kevin's talking about, and when he alluded to the fact that you could probably have some of the similar stories from yesteryear, let's go 40 years ago. Let's go 50 years ago. And this was the same story. So the things that Angel's talking about, the things that Dalen's talking about, those were the reasons why I wanted to come on council, because I was hearing far too much of what sounded familiar to me from when I was on campus. And it's just not acceptable. So there's something in this equation that is not computing. And that is why there is a need for change. And I don't mean more programmatics, but I do mean heart. We need transformational as opposed to transactional change at our university. And I believe that that begins with the heart for each individual. And that heart has to be anchored in something, which we take it to be our Catholic character. That's one of the things the university touts a lot is its Catholicity numbers. Catholicity numbers are not working for us right now. There's got to be something else that's there, that's more substantial. And that's what I would like for our listeners to reflect on, and our administration, whether it's on the university campus or whether it's as alumni, that we are called to action, and it starts first within and it works out. Kevin also alluded to the fact that we do things externally very well. We need to pay attention to taking care of home base. And that's often, I don't know what law that is. It's like a Murphy's Law kind of thing. You find communication companies can be outstanding, award winning, and internally their communications are the worst. We need to really pay attention to what we do externally so well and bring it home so that we're doing it internally first and then go out.
Yes. So to that point, let's talk a little bit about how we create, the images that you all mentioned at the beginning of the panel discussion. How do we create that character, recreate that character at Notre Dame? Because at the moment, it seems to be lacking. We've talked a little bit in the last panel about the materials that are going out to faculty hires, staff hires, and students in terms of recruitment or application process, and what that looks like. Getting at the heart of who we are and asking questions about power and privilege in the course of those and how people are using their power and privilege. What anti-racism efforts have they been involved in? What is their plan in terms of anti-racism efforts? And to do that uniformly in every, in terms of every person that is coming onto our campus. Has that idea been broadly discussed? Pamela, maybe you can address that.
So before I address that question, I just want to echo what Ava said about speaking to the heart. I think that it requires a combination of programs and that you have to reach each individual on campus where they are. So some will need, cultural competency 101, others are able to go more deeply, more quickly. One thing that unites the vast majority of students, especially our undergrad students, and faculty and staff on campus is our Catholic identity. And to that extent, I think it's really important that we rely on our Catholic social teaching and that we looked to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' pastoral letter against racism, where racism is denounced as a sin as part of that conversation. So just to look at ways in which we can really move people and impact their heart about these issues. So now to your question. There have been conversations on campus about ways in which we to recruit more broadly and to be more deliberate about attracting faculty who are interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, or anti-racism. In the hiring guides that are produced by the various colleges, most suggest, it's not mandatory, most suggest that the position description include a statement asking for that type of information, but it's really left to each department and department chair and search committee to write their own position description. They're not uniform. They're not dictated down by the provost's office.
All right. So then if it's not uniform and it's not required necessarily, or you can just write a blurb, really what impact is there? Is that, that doesn't sound sufficient. Where do we go from here? How do we create this so that when people step on the campus of Notre Dame, they know what to expect, and they know that the behavior that has been discussed on this panel is not only not acceptable, that they should be doing the opposite.
So I think and I'm limiting this just to faculty hiring. For faculty hiring, I think that we are in an opportune moment where there has been a focus placed by alumni, by students, by members of faculty and staff on campus to really re-examine the way in which we do the work that we do on a lot of different levels. And so this is a time in which we can stress and request more emphasis on hiring around diversity, equity, and inclusion, to expect more of the position descriptions. And I think that one thing that you saw from the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters was an anti-racist statement. Not every dean chose to publish a statement, but 50% of our faculty hires are in the College of Arts and Letters. So there's a dean who's willing to look at this issue, and whose willingness to look at this issue will have a huge impact on campus. So I think that while we're not doing what we would want to do in an ideal situation, there is an opportunity for us to move closer to that ideal through the conversations that are happening on campus. One thing that there's always sort of a tension between asking students to speak up on the issues, but as Avis and Kevin and others have said, when students are vocal around these issues, it helps to move the hearts of those faculty members and staff when they hear them. That's not a burden that I want to place on students, but it is a power that students have that I hope that they will exercise.
And this town hall meeting that's coming up, is that meant to create a series of town hall meetings where students will be able to come and describe their experiences?
So are you speaking about the town hall meeting that Father Jenkins is holding for African-American alumni, or is it a different town hall?
This is the one on August 5th, and it deals with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. So
okay.
I can't speak for the president's office to know whether it will be repeated. I think that will depend on the demands from those people who are in attendance. Oh, Ava says that she knows, right?
Yes, go ahead, Avis.
We were very grateful for the opportunity to have the provost and Father Jenkins come together and have a moderated discussion by one of the Board of Trustees members, Judge Ann Williams. And the purpose is for the quote unquote power seats at the university to address concerns that our diverse community has had with regard to the university's response to activities that have been happening nationally as a result of the continued heinous acts of law enforcement against people of color, especially African Americans, and specifically George Floyd's murder. There was an initial statement that we felt was sorely lacking. There was a follow-up statement that did not indicate any commitments to change, nor did it acknowledge the change.org petition of the alumni, the young alumni. And so this is an initiative and effort on the part of Father Jenkins to extend the conversations and the awareness of conversations that he has been having with various constituents on campus to address different matters, but our alumni are not aware, nor do we know what to expect going forward. And what we have said is that change is no longer an option, silence is no longer an option. And so that is the intent. What other people or departments choose to do after that is would be solely on them. So it's not intended to be a series, but it is intended to address things to the audience that has been directly affected and is waiting for some more specific feedback.
Okay, thank you, Avis. Thank you for clarifying that. Dalen, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, I just feel like, while these things are great, like to have these town halls and things like where things are openly like stated, I think the issue here is not so much about what people are saying and how people feel. It's more so about our university validating and getting behind us and taking like tangible, like disciplinary actions behind these racist things. There shouldn't be okay, granted, there is an education piece of with Angela's situation where maybe, you know, there's a microaggression. She says something dumb. She doesn't necessarily know. I mean, maybe she hasn't been around Black people or like, I don't know, whatever. She's working off of her media perspective of what Black people are, right? So that's where cultural competency courses come in play, where students are put in other scenarios and other cultures, immersed in other cultures. Like Henri Venter, one of my favorite professors, he says it like this. He says that Notre Dame likes to pride itself on diversity, but it doesn't like people who act different. So you have a lot of different students of different ethnic backgrounds, but if they don't act the way that Notre Dame student and Notre Dame people or the Notre Dame community wants them to act, then it's like, okay, like, all right, we're not going to validate we're not going to listen to you. Like, the issue isn't so much what people are saying and that people aren't willing to speak up for these issues and injustices on campus. There's no follow through. There's no backing behind these students. And they don't feel comfortable enough to be able to express their experiences, to be able to say, this is wrong. This is how I feel like I was, that there was an injustice on campus where I didn't feel like comfortable, where I didn't feel like this is my home. Like Angela's been here for 4 years and she says that this doesn't feel like her home under the dome. That should be enough reason to get the wheels turning in itself. We have a student who feels like her Notre Dame experience, which we pride ourselves on, was robbed of her. She doesn't have any backing. She doesn't feel like she has support. She said something in class and somebody felt like bold enough to be able to ask me, who are you? Bro, who are you? I got here just like you. I'm paying my tuition just like you. Like that's not okay. Like, I mean, these town halls and everybody saying these things, like that's cool. But at the end of the day, look, we got reasoning and disciplinary issues. Don't get drunk on campus. Don't be in a girl's dorm after 12 o'clock on campus. That'll be dealt with immediately. You'll be written up. You'll be sent into the hearings and all that stuff. You'll be on 3 strikes. That's immediate. Yet and still, we have blatant racial slurs in Stanford Hall at a party where people are forgive me for, well, you know, niggers, where white students feel like they can say that to Black students and there's no follow through behind that. There's nobody who's going to stand up and speak up and write these people up, get these dudes up out of here, because that's not a part of the Notre Dame family. That's not a part of our culture. So
that's Notre Dame. That's right. I feel you. I got you, Dalen. I agree. And I am wondering why it takes so long. What is the delay? Why, when, you know, students from the Native American Association have met with the leadership and asked to bring down or to cover up the murals that are offensive in the main building, why that didn't happen immediately? Why are we still talking about it a year and a half later? Why, in terms of these instances that you're describing, why haven't they been dealt with quickly? And also, what is taking so long just to announce that, yes, we are going to create this position and we're going to have somebody in charge who is coordinating the entire effort for DEI and, you know, faculty, students, staff, leadership, board of trustees, somebody who's coordinating that entire effort and making sure the trainings are happening, making sure that all this information about anti-racism is put out front in terms of who we are. You know, you talked about the character of the University Avis and changing hearts. And I think we change hearts in part by letting people know what we expect, right? And doing it in a timely manner. So I don't know who to throw that question out to, but does anybody know what takes so long? Why is it taking so long?
I think part of it has to do with, I mean, if we could answer that question, then we wouldn't have racism in the country. So we're talking 400 years, okay? 400 plus years.
But I'm talking
but
about
I know where you're coming from.
The murals, right?
I understand. It goes to, I think it goes to something that Dalen said when he said, when you are countercultural to what has been in place, then it is not well received. And it takes you outside of your comfort zone. And so people have to make a determination, in my opinion, as to how they're going to deal with being uncomfortable. Because many of the things we're talking about and the change we're looking for is going to take people outside of their comfort zone. in order to do. And I think the reason these things have not been met head on, even though a lot's in writing, there's a lot of rhetoric behind what people know could or should be done, has to do with embracing it, recognizing it. I've had people that after they read the change.org petition, there were alumni, white alumni, that wrote letters and said, is this my Notre Dame? I can't believe this is happening and those people are still in school. Are you kidding me? People, there's lack of awareness. There's complete lack of awareness, which we are learning as a nation how much exists. And people don't want to speak up. They don't want to acknowledge. We have alumni that go to events. They're not diverse alumni. They're not received. They're not received well as far as being welcomed. They don't come back. People say, well, why can't we just be more welcoming? I say, why can't you call up your diverse alumni, invite them personally, if you're a member of a board of a club, to come to an event, invite them to come for coffee. Let's get to know each other. Those are the kinds of things that are simple acts that can happen if you have the drive and the initiative and the desire to step outside your comfort zone. That's what it's going to take. Yes. That's what I believe.
And, you know, and to the point, I guess you're saying in part, leadership maybe it has their hands full, number one, but number two, that they are in an uncomfortable place at the moment, trying to make some decisions. We are trying to be patient. Angel, you've had your hand up for a while. I just want to let you all know that we are nearing the end of our panel time. So I may have to, I'm just going to ask you to maybe be brief as you make your comments. Angel?
Yeah. So I want to first thank Dalen for saying that earlier. Same thoughts here. I'd like to attempt to answer your question based on my experience on Erin Hoffman-Harding's advisory committee, and seemingly it's politics. In my opinion, in my experience at Notre Dame, a lot of the steps she has taken have been extremely performative, meaning only for performance, only to show the student body that they're attempting to do something, and really nothing has been done. After Savannah Morgan, who Dalen Hayes spoke of, was called the N-word, and then after that, the N-word and statements such as Blacks should be picking cotton was written throughout that dorm hall and other dorm halls. Once they found the person, they said it was a high school student who they didn't know was on campus, but they also didn't inquire into who let that high school student onto campus, who let that high school student into the dorm hall, and who encouraged or accepted and tolerated that behavior. And when we asked why Father Jenkins had not put out a statement condemning this behavior on campus and showing that they did not tolerate it, Erin Hoffman-Harding responded to us that there were too many complexities stopping him from making such a statement.
Okay, and that's unacceptable. I think we can all agree that that's unacceptable. So we are coming to the end. Kevin, you had your hand up, and I want to give you a moment because I haven't given you much time on the call.
Oh, no, I don't need much time. I just want to call what it is it's white privilege, white supremacy. Some people's discomfort is more important than other people's discomfort. So those murals, we were told the murals are going to be covered at Walk the Walk Week. The following Walk the Walk Week, we were told, oh, wait, we're going to wait a while until we can have this new building open and all that. It's nonsense. I'm sure some white person expressed their discomfort with this murals being covered up, and that was the reason why they're not covered up. When we've had students since 1998, when we first put the explanations of the murals and when the building got renovated, that have been expressing the fact that these murals are offensive and contribute to oppression. I mean, Angel, they're so insidious. Angel mentioned before that her second experience with racism was at the dorm when she was moving in, but I'll bet she was to the admissions office and had to walk around those murals before that. And that just slips by now because it's just part of the structure, right? So anyway, I think that is important, and I'll stop.
Okay, thank you. So it's time for us to start wrapping up. And what I would like to do is just to give you each a minute or so to just speak directly to the audience that is listening tonight. Just, from your heart, what you would like to say to them in terms of their own heartache, their own discomfort in this moment. Let's start with you, Pamela.
How did I know you were going to start with me? As I
You've been quiet for a little while.
Struggle to put my thoughts together. So this is definitely, I would say, straight from the heart. I came to Notre Dame as a law school student in 1985, and really with plans of working in labor and employment law. And I did practice law for almost 15 years. And then I have been moved through my own faith journey to work in issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Avis and I have talked about this before, but for me, the work that I do is the work that I'm called to do by my faith. And so that means for me that I will be doing this for the rest of my life. I am trying to have forgiveness and mercy and compassion as part of the process, while I do expect actions to take place as well. And I try to meet people where they are. And so I would encourage everyone on this call to sort of model that to the extent that they can. If this is a new issue for you, then take the time to educate yourself. There have been lots of book lists that are available for people to find out more about these issues. If you're someone who has been on this journey for a while, maybe think about reaching out to a friend who has not been on the journey and bringing them along. And if you have been at it for a long time, like myself, then I just encourage you to keep up the fight, as to sort of close with John Lewis, to get into good trouble.
Yes, yes. Angel, what would you like to say to the audience?
Why did I know I was going to be next? That's weird. Okay. The discomfort that you feel in this moment, hearing the stories of myself and other alumni and other students, is nothing compared to the discomfort that I felt every single day on Notre Dame's campus. I also want to comment on something that was said earlier, that I do think that racism and our semantics matter in these moments. Many people hear the word racist and they think that doesn't apply to me. I don't hate people of color. I am not prejudiced or discriminatory towards people of color. But when you support policies that discriminate against people of color, when you support people in power who discriminate against people of color, against poor people, then you are just as insidious, you are just as despicable in some cases as that racist person. I don't think racism is the only problem. It's the support and tolerance of racism that is also the problem, and that affected my entire time at Notre Dame's campus.
Right. Kevin, can we hear from you? Final words.
So I think I'll say I have high hopes because I think we're at a moment and there's an energy, and I hope that everyone, whether you're young or old like me, one thing I really want to say is I appreciate what Angel just said, and this is a lifelong process, and especially, those white people that are out there listening, I have to remind myself. So Angel, I'm sure, and Dale, and probably no one else on this call has to remind themselves to think about race every day and think about how they can be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem, because they don't have a choice, especially if they're operating in worlds like Notre Dame, because the fact of race is something that is in their face all the time. Whereas as a white person, I have to really consciously work on that. And I'm not saying that makes it easier, not harder, right? So take the easier step and think about how what you're doing contributes to anti-racism. And if you're not doing something that contributes to anti-racism, then you're falling into that group of people that Angel just talked about that are part of the problem, even if it's only because of their silence. Thanks.
Absolutely. Avis, what do you have to say to the crowd and to the alumni out there?
I would say live as you know that you're called to live based on the standards that Christ has set for all of us by his life. It's evident in his written word that we call the scripture. It's evident in the prayers that we pray. It's evident in the love that he has placed in our hearts that we share with others. We're not to discriminate against with whom we share that love. And it's time. Enough already. I'm a human being that bleeds red just like any other human being. We are not to be making judgments against people about anything based on their external appearance. We are to receive people as they are, get to know them as they are. We are all endowed with unique talents and gifts by our Creator. That's the enriching opportunity that we each have, is to unwrap one another and get to know and tap into those talents, those gifts, those abilities in order to enrich your life and to move closer to your Creator that we all say we want to do.
Powerful.
And don't limit others or limit yourself in your growth through what you shouldn't be doing. Let's pay attention to what you should be doing, and let's start to build relationships and treat one another accordingly now.
Very powerful. Dalen, you finish it off for us?
Yeah. I mean, like, in its basic makeup, man, I think that accountability, when we talk about accountability, it sounds great when you're saying it as as kind of like, something that we're striding to, but like when we really start taking these steps, and unfortunately our time kind of ended right before we could really get into before I felt like we could really take like, some real uncomfortable conversations and take them a step forward. I feel like this is something that is essential for us to grow as a university. And I feel like, saying these things and communicating our experiences are great, but at the end of the day, we need our university to stand behind our students, behind our faculty, behind our alumni, so we can grow as a university. Because we can't have God at the forefront of our university, and we're still not standing up against racism, against oppression, against these things that our students are having to live day in and day out. So, I would just, like I said, accountability and holding each other to the standard that we as a university like to stamp at the forefront of at the front of our name. So just continuing to push each other and remain accountable and have these uncomfortable conversations, regardless of whose toes you think you're going to step on. These are conversations that need to be had. And I hope that our university backs these conversations and gives us space to not only express ourselves, but feel comfortable enough that our university is going to stand behind and stand moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for coming today and allowing us to hear, your knowledge, your heartfelt feelings. Thank you for being vulnerable in this space and giving us the inspiration to keep moving forward, to keep knocking on the university's door to make sure these things happen. We have to close it out now. Edward Augustine has just appeared from the New York team to give us our send-off.
Thank you, Juliet. This is Edward Augustine here from New York, New York, ND class of 87 and co-chair of NDNY's Intercultural Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Thanks again for joining us tonight for the second event of our Beyond the Comfort Zone series. And a sincere thank to you all and all of our panelists, Avis, Pamela, Angel, Dalen, Kevin, and our moderator, my dear friend and classmate, Juliet. Remember, you can share your thoughts on this panel through the Google form in the description box below. I also want to thank the ND Club leadership, Marco, Rachel, and my co-chair, Rona. Follow us on social media channels linked in the description box below to hear about our other events in the series. And if you're not a dues-paying member of NDNY, we encourage you to become one today by going to our website link in the description below. Your support ensures that we can continue to have events like this. Please reach out if you have any questions and would like to help us plan future events. Good night and forever Notre Dame.
Awesome.